Welcome back to the HSP Connection, this mini-series of the Meeting of Minds podcast with me, Philippa Robinson.
And me, Robbie Lee.
In this series, we're looking at all things HSP from our personal experiences of discovering we are HSPs, working out what we need to thrive as HSPs, and working in our businesses as HSP coaches. This series has something for everyone, because really what is good for HSPs is good for everyone. So if you want to know more about what it means to be an HSP, I suggest you go back and listen to the first episode in this mini-series, which was episode 90 of the Meeting of Minds podcast, because in that episode we explain all about it. So go back there if you want to know more about it. Or otherwise, stick with us now. And because on today's episode, what are we talking about, Robbie?
Well, it's a topic that we've touched on in other episodes, but we haven't really gone into. So today we're taking a deep dive into boundaries. A big meaty topic.
Oh, yes. It so is. We've mentioned it a couple of times in other episodes and said we'll come back to it. So here we are.
Here we are. We've come back. So a good place to start is, what do we mean when we say boundaries? How are we defining it, Philippa?
So you want me to? I'll explain that. Well, I'll explain the way I think about it. Beautiful. Anyway. So to me, boundaries are really a resource management sort of system. That's the way I kind of like to think about it, because
I love that.
Yeah, thanks. We have limited resources. We have limited time, energy, money, all of those things for ourselves personally. And how do we work out where to put our resources and, where to put them first? Where are the most important places to put them?
Yeah.
So going back to a couple of episodes, we've talked about self-care, which is really important. A couple of episodes ago, we talked about finding our rhythm and really working out what we need. I think that was last week's, actually. And so once we've done all that, once we've got ourselves in a better place by really upping our self-care and we're feeling in a great place, we've worked out what we need to make us feel good. How do we make sure we're then using the resources we've got in a way that serves us, that serves us in the best way that we can? We can't always make all the choices that we want just in the way that serves us the best, but how can we do that? And for me, boundaries, I think, I used to be a property lawyer. So when you say boundary, I usually think of a wall, but I don't think of a wall when I think of boundaries in the way we're talking about them today. I think of it more as a fence, maybe, that has spaces in it, that has gaps in it, so you can see through. Or actually, my preference is a glass structure, so I can see through. So I can see what is on the other side. But this glass structure is going all the way around me. So I can see what is on the other side, but I get to choose what comes in this side of the glass with me. I get to choose the people. I get to choose where I spend my time. I get to choose where I spend my money. And all the other resources I get to choose, and they come in this side of the wall with me. Glass wall, this side of me, and everything else has to stay on the other side. So I know it's there, and sometimes it might come this side, and sometimes it might be the other side, but I get to choose. And for me, that choice that I am making about how I use my resources in the way that suits me the best and helps me thrive, that is the boundary. Putting that boundary in place. Yes. Do you think, I mean, I've been trying to listen to myself as I'm saying it, and I'm thinking, do you think that's a good explanation?
I love the concept of a resource management system. I've never heard boundaries talked about that way. It makes such sense to me. Yes, beautiful, because to echo what you're saying, we have a limited amount of our own resources, right? Our time, our energy. And I love what you said about choice, that we get to choose. You know, whenever boundaries come up, one of the things that always comes up for me when I think about boundaries is that as a child, I learned from the time of a child that when people were feeling something, I knew when something changed, right? When I knew when someone was upset, I knew if someone was angry, I knew, like, as highly sensitive folks, we pick up on all that, right? As a kid, you don't necessarily know what's going on, you just know things. And I know a lot of my clients have said similar things to me, and this was definitely true for me. I would just do what I could to make it better, right? Because first of all, I noticed it. Second of all, I'm impacted by the feelings of others, and I don't have any way of talking about this as a kid. I don't know. So I'm just trying to make the people around me happy, so then it feels better for me also, right? It's just that. And I learned something that was very unhealthy, which is, oh, I'm responsible for how other people feel. And so boundaries for me is taking back that notion of, oh, I'm responsible for how I feel and my resources and my energy. And boundaries allow me to then choose, like exactly what you were saying. Instead of being at the whim of it, which is how it was for me as a kid, I didn't know any better, to then now I can make those choices. It's such a bit, it's so important to have that choice, to see that choice.
It is. And we're not talking here about the people who are on the other side of the boundary are somehow like we're walled off from them, or we don't want them in our lives. Or it's about how they behave, how their energy, what they need, what they take, all of those things. If we don't want that with us on our side of the boundary, we can put them over the other side, and give it back to them. Say, you know, that's your shit. You stay over that side and you sort that out. I am not responsible for that.
Yes.
And it you know, I think what I come up against a lot with clients about boundaries is, but isn't that selfish? Or how can I do that? I can't do that to my mother, or I can't do that to this really old friend. I've been friends with this person for years, but she drains all the energy out of me being with her. But I can't do it anymore. How, you know, but I don't want to fall out with her. So it is, you know, I suppose by saying it's a resource management system and you just get to choose is really simplifying it, because it's not always very easy to just go, okay, you're over that side and you're over this side. But being able to understand that we have a choice, whether you're over that side or this side, does set us free to be able to use the resources we do have in a way that we choose.
Yes. Instead of them just disappearing and us not knowing what happened. Like, where did all my energy go?
They've gone. And and that might look like, I think you know, the person who you've been friends with for a long time, and you don't really want to lose their friendship because you've got so much history. You know, okay, you don't want to, there's so much history, but you know, you don't want to always be at the end of the phone when they want to sort of emotionally dump on you for an hour, 2 hours at a time, 3 times a week. And you know, if you're noticing that you're starting to dread seeing them because for whatever reason, so it's not about pushing them out altogether, but maybe you could limit the amount of time that you spend with them. Maybe you could have a conversation around, you know, actually, I can't have a conversation with you about everything that is going wrong for you that this many times a week, because it leaves me really drained. And I'm really sorry if that doesn't sit well with you, but I need to manage my energy better. I need, or however the language is going to work, because that language is quite normal to me now. But I do understand that not everybody is comfortable with that sort of language. But it's working out a way to get what you need in the middle of what is possible.
Yeah.
And sometimes we do need a bit of support with that, because we need somebody like outside who's not involved, who's not invested in that, to actually help us look at it.
Yes, absolutely. I highly recommend support for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
It can feel dangerous to set a boundary. It can feel like you might be losing something, or you might be hurting someone that you care about.
Yeah.
That's how it occurred for me. It felt like, well, I don't want to hurt them. And actually what I started noticing, because I've been working on boundaries for several years now, it's an ongoing practice. But something a few years ago I noticed, because one of the places I had a hard time setting boundaries was in the workplace,
Oh.
because people needed help. I wanted to be helpful. The result of that, though, was that I was just exhausted and overwhelmed all the time, and really wasn't as helpful as I could have been, because just saying yes to everything depleted all the resources, like you're talking about. And what I noticed, Philippa, is it was typically, I'm not trying to put people in boxes, but it was typically men that I saw do this. They would just say, no, that doesn't work for me. And I remember one time going, what? Like my internal dialogue was, what? What? But it made me start realizing, first of all, that was not in my vocabulary, to be able to just say, no, that doesn't work for me. And then I started going, wait, we're allowed to say that? And then I thought, wait, who is allowed to say that? Right? It was a whole bunch of discussions that started going on in my mind. But it really kickstarted for me, oh, just because someone else has a request or a preference doesn't mean I have to say yes to it. Like, there's a lot of other things to consider before I say yes. And it could be the impact of that request on, if it's a work thing, the impact of that request on the workspace, on me, right? What else? What are my priorities? You mentioned priorities earlier on, right? Where does this fit in a list of priorities?
Mm.
Is it well suited to what I'm able to bring? Just does it feel good for me? Like, there are a lot of things to consider. And another thing I noticed is that it became easier for me to give myself some space before I answered the question, because sometimes in the moment, especially as I was learning boundaries, it was harder to say no, even if I felt like no, or it was easier for me just to get swept up into the emotion of the other person and want to say yes for them, because I was feeling that. I was like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And then afterward I'd be like, shit, what did I just say yes to? So
Oh,
I
yeah.
started to use that. Sound familiar?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You could flatter me most of the time. I mean, I was so
Right.
hungry for approval and to feel worthy that,
Yeah.
you just needed to give me a little bit of some nice words, and I would, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So absolutely, I recognize
Yeah.
all of that. So sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, please don't be sorry. So I started to give myself space. I would say, let me think about that. I'll get back with you
Yes.
at X time. And then it was a twofold thing. One, it gave me space so that I could be with my own energy and go, okay, wait, without them there in their energy. Okay, how do I feel about this?
Yeah.
And I can weigh all the things. But then also, it enabled me to then send a yes or a no via email, for example, which, again, when I was learning boundaries, that's a lot easier to do than face to face to somebody,
Yes.
right? So there's there's techniques. And I liked what you said about boundaries doesn't mean cutting yourself off from everyone and everything. I mean, you may make a decision like this, I do want to say no, complete no to this relationship over here. But for most of them, my experience is exactly what you said. Like it's the fence. And so, or I love that glass analogy too. Like it's these people are still in my life, but I'm interacting with them in a different way than I used to.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be all or nothing, right?
No, and I think we can feel that it's a bit of an all or nothing sometimes, especially if we've grown up with our survival pattern being people pleasing, or that was one of my many survival patterns. So people pleasing, it was a very hard thing for me to break, in a way, to be able to start saying no, to understand that no is a complete sentence.
Yes.
Philippa, can you do this? No. What? Is it okay? Can we say that? Can we say, no, that doesn't work for me? Or no, yes, I don't have capacity for that. Or no, I can't come and help you do that today. No, yes, I don't want to go to that concert with you. Thanks for asking, but no, I don't want to go. My week is completely overloaded. I don't have any more space to go, or any of those things. No, is, yes, sometimes we might want to add a little bit of an explanation, but I don't think we should feel we need to.
That's right. And it also depends. Sorry, go ahead.
No, if somebody issues us with an invitation or a request out the blue, can you do that? No. Is okay. I mean, don't be wrong. I am not great at saying no. I am learning to explain less. I am I know that no is an answer. I'm still working on that being my answer sometimes. Yes. There should be no shame or anything attached with doing it by email or some other message, rather than, who wrote the rule that said you have to do it face to face? It's much more important that you get the answer that is right for you across. And if the best way for you to do that is by email or text or something else, then do that while you are practicing this. I do also want to say, though, that one thing that becomes quite hard when we get to the stage of, I think most of us get to the stage of putting boundaries in place because we know we need to do it.
Yeah.
But the other side of it is that, so for me, I was, a consummate people pleaser, and that became very much my identity. And when I knew that I had to stop that because I took on too much, really a cost to me that I couldn't afford anymore, like physically and or everything else. It really brought into question for me my identity, and that made it quite a hard shift to make. Who am I if I am not the person who says yes?
Yes.
Who am I if I am not? Or ask Philippa. Philippa will do it. Yeah, she's really busy, but she'll fit it in. Who am I if I am not that person? Yeah. Shifts in our state of identity are the highest level shifts we can make. So they are I was going to say hardest, that's not quite the right word, but they because all shifts are hard it can be hard, but they need some real resolve and resources to enable us to do that. So it can take a few times to practice. And even if we have to practice having conversations in the mirror with ourselves, if we have to run through conversations in our head, if we have to really galvanize ourselves to do it. And even if then, you know, I've done this loads of times, then bottled at the last minute, but I know I'll get there eventually, because
that's right.
I have to.
Yes.
So yeah, you were?
I was just going to say, I was only chuckling because when you said, you know, it might take a few times, and I was like, well, or a lot of times, like practice. There's, yeah, it's a skill to practice. And to your really important point, when it involves a shift in how we view ourselves, our identity, the value we think we're bringing to the world, it can be terrifying to then shift that behavior. Absolutely.
It can.
Yeah.
It can. But if we don't, and we carry on the same way that we have been, you know, that we have been going, we will just, you know, deplete ourselves more and more and more. So you know, that's why we talked about boundaries in the self-care episode, because putting boundaries in place is a really, you know, it's like almost the ultimate act of self-care, really.
Yes.
And you know, some people say, yeah, but what are other people going to think, and what how is it going to be received? Well, the answer is usually it's not received very well, and I'll be really open and honest about that, because it often isn't. And I would say, you know, there's perhaps some thought around to be given to that. Why are people not receiving it very well? And mostly the answer is because it suits that other person for you not to have boundaries in place.
Thank you. That's 100% right. They are benefiting from it.
They are.
Which is totally fine for people to benefit. What works really great, though, is if both parties are benefiting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If, I mean, very often people are attracted to HSPs because of what we give and who we are, and and even on an energetic level, or our ability to listen so well and help people feel heard. Like, there's just so much that we offer, sometimes not even consciously. And so people will be drawn to us. And if we're leaving an encounter and the other person is like, oh my gosh, thank you, I always feel so much better when I talk to you, this was amazing, and we're thinking, oh my God, I'm exhausted. And that is the pattern over and over again. I mean, I would submit that's not super healthy for us.
I would. Your submission is received and agreed.
And I bring this one up because it's something I experienced and I hear so often from my clients. Like, this is, and it then comes into, you know, the identity piece, like you talked about. Well, I'm the person that people come to. I'm the safe place. Right?
Yeah.
What if I stop doing that? Who does that make me?
Yeah.
And what I would say is, again, back to what you said before, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? We can still, and I would actually say we could be better suited to be that for people if we're doing it intentionally and we're able to say yes and no to the encounters we want to, because it's literally something I do for my job now, and it fills me up, like being, you know, being of service to people in that way. But when I was of service to every human that I came in contact with, whether I wanted to be or not, I was exhausted and overwhelmed and not helping anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the people you're always on, you're always available, it's the environment, it's everything, isn't it? So yes, you get to serve people now, but you get to dictate your day, the time that you spend, the time that you can make sure you have in between clients. You know, you get to manage those resources.
That's right.
In a way that enables you to be at your best.
That's right.
And actually, I've just said the word enable, haven't I? And actually, you know, when we don't have any boundaries in place, you know, we can find that we are enabling behavior in others because we're not saying no.
Yeah, that's right.
And you know, so my experience of, I grew up in a family with no boundaries. You know, my mum was an alcoholic. She ruled the roost. If she was in a good mood, everybody was okay. If she was in a bad mood, wow, you know, just run for your bedroom and shut the door and hope it'll all pass. And when I turned 30, round about 30, I just decided I couldn't do it anymore. I tried everything that I could think of to have a better relationship with my mother. And I didn't have a big row. There was no big sort of showdown, but I just didn't phone her anymore. I just couldn't do it anymore. So I was estranged from her for quite a long time. And so that's not that's a very extreme example of a boundary, because actually I could not be on that roller coaster with her anymore. If she was up, I was up. She was down, I was down, and I just couldn't do it anymore. It was just not good for me. And I had no idea how to put anything else in place other than an absolute boundary.
Mm-hmm.
But also I had to cut myself off at that stage from the possibility that things might be okay. You know, and from you know, what bit of love that maybe I might have got every now and again. I mean, there was, you know, it was hard, it was complicated, and with family it really can be, but my life was so much better without being on that roller coaster. I'm not saying it was better without my mother, but it was better without my mother in the way that she was. But that, I mean, you know, estrangement is like, you know, that's boundaries plus, isn't it? But it was essential.
Yes.
I absolutely had to do it. And sometimes that's where we find ourselves. There are people who we perhaps decide not to spend our time and our energy with, and sometimes we can find a middle ground that'll work.
That's right.
It's now, you know, it's calling it a resources management system, you know, it's a bit of fun, really, but also there is something to that, but also it's real human beings, connection, family. It's real, you know, hardcore stuff, but it's also so really, really important.
Oh gosh, yes. You know, and Philippa, and when you were talking about that with your mom, you know, you said you couldn't be at the whim, right? And which goes back to being in choice. Like, boundaries give us the choice in how we get to spend our energy versus being at the whim of someone else's energy, which can be so hard.
It can. But also, you know, maybe if I'd known then what I now know, I'm not sure I could have done anything different, because I think certainly with your parents, that, you know, we immediately step back to being that child when we just walk through their front door, don't we? So but maybe if something like that came up again in my life, I might be able to say something like, you know, I love you, and I love spending time with you, but I don't want to spend time with you when you're drinking, maybe. You know, I'm just thinking of my mum as an example. Maybe I could have said that. So, you know, like the friend who rings up all the time and sort of moaning about stuff, you know, maybe I might be able to say something like, I love speaking to you, I love spending time with you, but can we actually talk about something different? Or I'm trying to think of other examples. I think the human relationship is the hardest place to put boundaries in place. I think where we spend our time can be linked with people, but where we spend our time, we can work on with a little bit more clarity sometimes, perhaps. But it is normally actually time, energy. It is normally revolved around people, isn't it?
It sure does.
Yeah.
Very often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a client who was telling me the other day that she went through her Facebook friends, bunny ears friends,
right.
and called a lot of them because she didn't want to see their posts anymore, and she didn't want them to see her posts. And she thought she'd get a real backlash. Nobody actually batted an eyelid. Nobody said, "Hang on a minute," and the result was she felt a lot freer. She felt much more able to post, knowing that only the people she wanted to see things saw them, and she wasn't seeing things that made her feel bad.
I mean, what a great example of boundaries paying off. Yeah.
So we can all curate our social media feeds, can't we? We can all look at the amount of time we're spending on social media. Does it make us feel good? If it makes you feel good, great, go for it. If it's not making you feel so good, maybe don't do it quite so much.
Yes.
Yeah. I wasn't on social media anywhere at all until I started my business 2.5 years ago. Wow. Nowhere, because I knew it wouldn't be good for me.
Yeah.
And I'm not so sure I like it now, but yeah, I wasn't anywhere at all. Although I was a bit strange, like people would say, "You're not on Facebook?" "No." "Instagram?" "No." "I'm not anywhere." And they'd like, "Ooh." Anyway, that's beside the point.
It's a great example of, though, knowing what works well for you, right? And putting a boundary in place around it. Something for when you were talking about kind of relationships with my wife and I at the beginning. I mean, we've been together 15, 16 years. And at the beginning of our relationship, my go-to was to kind of caretake her feelings. And like, we did it without even thinking about it. Right. And then over the years, as I kind of learned more about myself, and she learned more about herself, we had to shift things. And it used to be something like she'd come home from work and energetically vomit all the terrible things that happen, right? And I would be like, "Oh my gosh, that's awful," right? And like picking up her emotions and helping her feel better. And then I would feel like shit afterwards. And I started recognizing that, and this is no blame on my wife. Like, this was our pattern together. It's what we did. I would share my shit, she would, right? But what I learned was, hey, this interaction isn't working for me. And what I started to say was, I remember one time just stopping her, and I would say, "Excuse me, I really love that you want to share your day with me. And I'm already feeling a little wobbly. And so if this conversation is going to be just all the yuck of your day, I don't know that I'm able to hold that." And now, let me just say, she and I had worked already on developing language together, and like this wasn't a from A to Z. Like, there was a lot of steps in the middle there, but I'm able to say now, like, "Hey babe, I'm not was there a great thing that happened today that you wanted to share? I do care about everything, but I'm not in a good space. I'm not in a good headspace. I can't." And Philippa, that was so hard for me. And still sometimes it's hard, because it feels like, well, if I was really loving, I would let her just do whatever she needed, right? Like, that voice still comes up for me.
Yeah.
And it's like, I have to lean into the knowing that she's also a grown, whole human being, adult, who has resources. I love her, and she knows I love her. So this isn't me going, "I don't love you, I don't care about your shit." It is me taking care of myself and saying, "I love you, and this is what I'm able to offer." And she does it back for me, and it helps things, but it's still hard. And we really trust each other, but it's still hard. I still have that voice sometimes, like I said, it's like, if you really loved her, if you were really a good wife.
Well, that goes back to all the conditioning that society brings to us about, I think especially to women, Although that's interesting because obviously you and your wife are both women, so that's really like both of you doing it. But also I do think that's the image of marriage that we're given, that you are there come what may for whatever. Whereas actually what we've been talking about, and that's why boundaries has come up a lot in our previous episodes, is about honoring ourselves, honoring what we need and what and we're not mind readers, our partners are not mind readers, only we know what we need. So in that brilliant example you've just given us, your wife doesn't know when she comes home from how you're feeling. So you have to honor that in yourself and go, do you know what, I'm not feeling great, and I'm sorry you've had a bad day, but I just don't have the bandwidth to take to listen to this. And that's really important. It's not selfish, because otherwise, like you say, she's feeling crappy anyway, and then you end up feeling crappy as well.
And I will tell you, my fear was she would feel unloved and unsupported, and for, I would say 99% of the time she welcomes me saying that, because she's like, great, I know where the rails are. I know, because she doesn't want to create a shitty experience for me. She loves me. But to your point, she's not a mind reader, right? She doesn't know. So it's not her job to know where my limit is. It's my job to say where it is, and then her job to listen to that, know?
And that's why all these things we've been talking about, boundaries, are really important. And also it takes a bit of practice, so it doesn't necessarily come easily and naturally, but it does actually bring freedom and space and great things, because also once you've decided who's not coming, the things that aren't on your side of the glass, so if that's what we're looking, look at all that beautiful space. So what are you going to invite in? Who are you inviting in? What things, what are you going to do for yourself? What experiences are you going to have? Who are you going to spend time with? What are you going to spend your money on? All that space becomes available because it's not being sucked out by whatever has been sucking it out. And it's not easy, but as has become the mantra of this podcast now, it's possible, it's doable, and it's worth it.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is.
It is.
It is.
So it's the ultimate act of self-care, which is why we talked about it back in episode 92. And I don't know. Did you? I think this is we're getting to a good place to end. I wondered, is there anything that you'd thought about that we'd not mentioned yet?
I just really do want to echo as you are learning to put boundaries in place, do seek support, and please give yourself love and grace. For me, I would go in and think, I'm going to set the boundary, and then I didn't. And I would go in and say, okay, I'm going to set the boundary, and then I didn't. And then I would go in and say, I'm going to set the boundary, and then I did. Right. And then I would do it a couple of times, and then, I didn't. And all of that is just a learning process. There's no need to beat ourselves up, right? This is an unpracticed skill, and it comes with all the things that we already talked about, like identity and a whole bunch of things. So give yourself some grace and some love, and know that it does get easier. I can't say that setting boundaries is easy for me still, but it's way easier. And I'll say, Philippa, then the amount of times that still to this day, I will catch myself with a really long explanation about why I'm saying no thank you to something. And I go, delete. No, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me. Send.
Exactly.
Because I cannot be for most people, like, this will depend on your relationship and the importance of the thing and all the stuff. But for most people, I don't want to be in the business of explaining my no.
Yeah. Beautiful. I agree. And the last thing I'd like to say is, in line with what you've said, that it takes practice. So don't, start small. Don't start with a boundary in place with your mother.
Yeah. Yes.
That's not a great place to start, because that is tough. You kind of need to work up to that. So I think a great place to start is maybe putting a few boundaries in place with yourself, because you are in control of it, really, of yourself. So how about things like, we've already talked about social media feeds, curating your social media feed, or what do you get to see, and how much time are you on there? Those are great places to start. I have now started, I don't have my phone next to my bed anymore. I have it on the other side of the room. I mean, I know plenty of people will leave it out of the room or down on another floor in the kitchen or something, so that you're not tempted to scroll last thing at night, first thing in the morning, or even in the middle of the night. That is an example of a boundary.
Beautiful.
I don't want to do that. Prioritizing movement or exercise. I have never been one for prioritizing that, and I really am trying to now, and it makes a world of difference, because I am committing to myself to do that, and I am following through on it, which is helping me trust myself, because I'm doing what I'm saying I'm going to do. So that is a boundary, but it's lots of other things also. It's helping me improve my self-trust and self-love and all those things. So but that's an example of a boundary. It might be not answering your work email or work phone calls at the weekend or out of hours. That might be another one. Asking for help. So when you know that you're struggling with something, allow yourself to ask for help. So the boundary there would be, letting other people in to help you.
It's beautiful.
Not overbooking yourself and allowing yourself time to rest. I mean, that's a classic one for me. I'll just do that. And just roll all these things one into another. Sticking to a budget, maybe. That could be another example of a boundary. Sticking to a bedtime. Maybe.
I noticed how a lot of these are tied with self-care.
They are exactly. And I think the last one I had was, if you eat foods that don't make you feel great afterwards, maybe limiting the amount of those foods that you have, or something like that. I'm not saying, I'm not talking about being on a diet or any of that, but I mean, I've known for years that chocolate makes me feel really groggy, and I'm not saying I don't eat any of it, but I actually eat less than I did, or I only eat it at the end of the day when it doesn't matter that I feel groggy. But those sort of things. So you can start doing some of those quite easily. I would have thought, and work up.
Find what's easy, I think, is, find a place that's easy. Maybe it is a friend that you feel like that you have a really tight relationship with, that you feel like you could start saying, hey, I'm working on boundaries, and could we do X, right? But find where it's easy, and start there. And
maybe you could work on it together.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah.
And, I'm hearing again that the boundaries are tied to energy. Like, that's what the whole thing we're talking about. And a resource management system for our energy is really how I'm going to start conceptualizing this now. I think it's super helpful. So boundaries help you to be able to be of choice, and to say which things are you going to lend your energy to, and which things are you not.
Because it's not infinite.
That's right.
Yeah. Marvelous. I think we'll leave it there. Great place. I love this. I knew it would be quite a big, juicy conversation. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, everybody who has been listening and watching. We are coming up to what I'm really hoping we're going to do a Q&A session sometime soon. So please, if you have any questions for us, please let us have them. You can send it. If you listen on Spotify, there's a Q&A button there, so you can send us a question there. There is an email to get in touch with the Meeting of Minds podcast in the show notes. You can contact Robbie or I through our websites. Robbie is Robbie Lee, leigh.com. I am safeandsupported.co.uk. There are lots of ways. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram. I think you're on both, aren't you, Robbie?
Yes,
Perhaps not
although
quite as active,
not
that active.
Yep, not very
so
often,
maybe get in touch
yes.
with me rather than Robbie. But please send us your questions, because that
Yes.
it'd be really, we love these conversations we're having. We are getting comments from people. We know that you're listening and that you're finding them useful. But also, have you got any other questions that you might like to ask us? Because we would really like to give you our response to them, because there's never a right or wrong, but give you our response. So thanks for being here with us again, and we'll see you next week. Okay.
Bye from me.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Meeting of Minds podcast. You can find this podcast in all the usual places. Please tell your friends. Please subscribe. And if you have a moment, I'd be really grateful if you could rate and review, as it helps other people find us and helps me spread the messages of empowerment and positivity that I'm really passionate about. If you want to find out more about me, you can visit my website, www.safeandsupported.co.uk. Until next time, bye.